Okay, in our last video for this week, we're going to have a look at some key examples of economic integration, firstly here in Australia, then moving into Asia more widely and with a specific focus on Southeast Asia, and then looking at some global examples of economic integration. But as I say, let's start by focusing closer to home. And one of the key examples here in Australia is the Australia-New Zealand Closer Economic Relations Trade Agreement, or ANZERTA. It does make you wonder how many politicians sat around trying to think of a snazzy, sexy acronym that sounded good. And they did, they got there eventually. Closer Economic Relations Trade Agreement. Anyway, we'll give them credit, they got to ANZERTA. And it actually was devised back in the 80s, in 1983, and built upon the previous New Zealand-Australia Free Trade Agreement of 1966. You can actually see some delegates of the two respective governments signing that agreement back in 1983 down the bottom of your page there. It also led to the establishment of the Protocol on the Acceleration of Free Trade in Goods, which resulted effectively in the total elimination of tariffs and other quantitative restrictions like quotas between the two countries by the 1st of July 1990. So it made it easier for for firms and governments between these two countries to do international business. So of course we here in Australia now get to take advantage of all the wonderful sheep in New Zealand, and it's worth noting, for all the stereotypes, and there are many, about New Zealand and sheep, they do in fact have the record holder of the largest sheep. That is it right there. So here in Australia we get to take all of he and his friends' wool now at a cheaper rate than before the establishment of ANZERTA. It also importantly helped facilitate the Trans-Tasman travel arrangement, so it's now much easier for us as consumers and individuals to travel between these two closely aligned countries, and also to do business dealings between the two as well. What has it meant so far? Certainly there has been an increased level of trade between the two countries, and in fact two-way investment has been worth more than 110 billion Australian dollars to this point. So clearly significant investment that has resulted through the establishment of ANZERTA. We've also seen increased flows of labour, although this has typically tended to be greater in terms of, from New Zealand to Australia than back the other way. We're seeing a lot of migrants coming and working from New Zealand into Australia, not so many Australians going to work in New Zealand. Pleasingly, it has met nearly all of its stated goals. So when it was set up, all the things that it aimed to achieve, it's been quite successful in completing those. And it's certainly been strengthened by a strong and intelligent regulatory or legal environment, certainly in a comparative sense on the global scale there. One of the key factors here to note is that ANZERTA has been a lot more successful than a lot of other of these previous attempts at free trade agreements that we've spoken about in the last few videos, and NAFTA is absolutely a great example here. And there are a few reasons why that's been the case. Number one is because the countries of Australia and New Zealand are so similar, which has meant that this free trade agreement has been much easier to manage. So we obviously have similar political, legal and economic systems, which means that doing business between them is much easier, but also establishing agreements and protocols is also much easier. The cultures of Australia and New Zealand are very, very similar. Certainly if you compare on Hofstede's Dimensions, which we talked about earlier in the semester, we compare quite strongly there to New Zealand, but also the level of development, our economies overall, and our things like our relative level of wealth and disposable income amongst the local people there are very similar. So when you implement these standardised practices and procedures, it works a lot better when you have these similar, these commonalities between the two nations. And that's in contrast, for example, to the EU, which we talked about previously, where you have a lot of different member states within that agreement. ANZERTA is also likely to result in further integration to include, for example, a lot of the Pacific Island nations, while NAFTA has limited integration. I know we spoke previously about how there was some possibility to include some of the Caribbean and Central American nations in NAFTA moving forward, but there are strong question marks over that, whereas there is a bit of a push within NZERTA for expansion there, and it's been mutually beneficial, which is perhaps most important of all. Both New Zealand and Australia have seen positive outcomes from this agreement's establishment. Whereas NAFTA, a lot of the criticism, although not that it's difficult to believe potentially if you listen to Trump, is that it has largely benefited the US, with especially Mexico, for example, being taken advantage of to a certain extent, and actually leading to increased levels of protectionism rather than reducing that. And certainly, given that Trump is now renegotiating NAFTA, it will be interesting to see whether that level of protectionism actually increases moving forward. Let's move now to economic integration in Asia, and what by far one of the largest within that region is the ASEAN Agreement, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and it currently includes the countries of Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia. So some key countries within that Southeast Asian region here. And just like some of the other attempts at economic integration, it does present magnificent opportunities for photos. And you can see here we have some of the leaders from these countries at the summit back in 2015. And I just want to draw your attention to just illustrate the dedication that some of these countries have to the ASEAN agreement. Look at our man here on the end. He is literally shaking an invisible man's hand. Talk about dedication. Good on you, my friend. He has killed it. The aim of ASEAN, like most of the free trade agreements, is to foster freer trade between each of the member countries and to also to achieve some cooperation in their industrial policies, given that a lot of the industrial related industries are key to the success of these member nations. An ASEAN free trade area between the 6 original members has come into effect in 2003 with talks of expansion happening there too. And ASEAN and AFTA are certainly moving towards establishing a free trade zone, so that first level of economic integration that we spoke about in the first or earlier in the videos this week, moving beyond just an agreement into an actual established trading bloc there. Alright, our final slide for this week looks at a key global attempt at economic integration, so moving beyond just a specific region like Southeast Asia now. And what we're going to focus on here, the one that we're going to focus on, is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the TPP. And you may well have heard about this in the news. It's certainly been a prominent discussion point within not only international business, but just in daily news over around the world for the last couple of years. It is in effect a trade agreement between the Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, Vietnam, and until very recently, the United States. In fact, it was only at the beginning of 2017 that the US removed themselves from the TPP. Now combined, these countries make up approximately 40% of the globe's GDP, so $27.4 trillion, and 1/3 of global trade. So it's a massive attempt here at economic integration that really does incorporate a fair chunk of the world's international business. Now, as I said, it wasn't that long ago that the US did decide to remove themselves from this trade deal, and it was something that Trump had made a priority in his election campaign. So he actually signed a presidential memorandum removing the US from the TPP, citing loss of jobs as a key problem. So one of the similar concerns that he's expressed with NAFTA, he said this is also a problem with the TPP. And I think we actually have some footage here of Trump signing that memorandum. There we go. Oh, no, okay, not quite, my bad. That's the one we're after. Different memorandum there. Whichever one he did end up signing, the end result here is that questions do exist over the future and worth and value of the TPP moving forward. So while some countries like Australia and New Zealand have come out and said we still want to continue this, given that even without the US there are some key global players here that are involved in the deal, others like Japan have said Japan has said that they are not really sure whether it's worth continuing in such an agreement, given that the largest trading partner here, the US, has now left the deal. And this has created an opportunity, certainly from a Chinese perspective, and the Chinese government is now pushing its own proposed alternate or rival agreement, which it's called the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, to effectively replace the TPP, given that the US is now no longer involved. And if they are successful in getting these countries who had previously been committed to the TPP to transfer into this revised agreement, it would certainly significantly enhance China's global position of power. They would be the key trading partner within that group there, replacing the United States, and that would certainly enhance their ability, their power on a global scale. When it comes to doing international business, they would be the key trading partner in the region, absolutely, if this deal were to be agreed to. So you can see that these are the kinds of issues and events which will literally impact not just international business, but each of our lives moving forward, given their significant impact that will have on the way that business is done on a global scale.